The science of murder, the analysis of dangerous new psychedelic drugs, and the fingerprints and trace evidence left behind by suspects at crime scenes are just some of the topics that I'm going to be discussing with a panel of forensic science investigators later this month. And you can come along for free. A special public event to celebrate 50 years of Forensic Science Ireland is going to take place at the National Convention Centre in Dublin on May 28th. The doors are at 6 p.m. and tickets are available now on eventbrite.com. Don't miss it. Sinead, thanks so much for giving us some time today to talk about the story of farmer Mike Gaine, which I think is just so tragic. And the shocking developments over the weekend, of course, was that there was body matter, body parts found, and that it has been confirmed that it is indeed the remains of Mike Gaine. Let's go back to the beginning on this story. And Mike Gaine is a popular local resident of Kenmare, beautiful village in Kerry that God knows how much the population grows to over the summer when all the tourists arrive. But this was in the kind of winter months when it was probably just populated by local people. He was just going about his business, was last seen in the town and went out towards his farm, which is near Mall's Gap, and was never seen again.
That about sums it up, all right, Nicola. March 28th was the last official sighting of the very popular Kerry farmer. He was seen in Centra doing his normal days, buying his phone credit, and he got back into his van outside the Centra shop, which is not far from his farm, and it appears drove back to that farm. That Jeep was found the following day, on Friday, March 21st, now more than 8 weeks ago, parked in the farmyard when friends of his noticed he was first missing. So we're going back full 8 weeks. I mean, the man is extremely well known in Kerry. He was noted, I suppose, missing the following day because friends had realised they hadn't made any contact with him. And I understand some of them actually went to the farm looking for him, and that's where the whole thing, I suppose, he was officially reported missing on that day, which is now more than 8 weeks ago.
And the try and describe the whole landscape for us. I actually know that Mall's Gap area. I'm a regular visitor to Kenmare. I have relatives down there. So it's quite wild, the land on the way up to that Mall's Gap. I sometimes would cycle up to it. Where is the farm in relation to that? How vast is this land that he owns? And was he actually living there or elsewhere?
I suppose the land is extremely rugged terrain. I mean, throughout the 8 weeks of the extensive investigation into his disappearance, and it's a massive area of land. It's very rugged, very difficult terrain, very boggy. I mean, it's halfway, I suppose, between Kenmare and probably closer to Mall's Gap, but about halfway between Kenmare and Mall's Gap. It's a huge, vast area. I mean, there's lots of mountains. Then there's a farm just below the road. I mean, anyone passing it can see right down into Mike's yards. They would have seen the area. It's extensive. There's no nearby houses, which obviously has hindered the investigation because there's no CCTV. Now, Mike himself does not live there. He lives further down the road, closer to Kenmare town, in an area around Lisacleric, which his wife Janet, he lives in that house. So he doesn't actually live in the farm, but it's quite close to it. So
and Sinead, that's probably quite normal. This was probably was this his family farm that has been in the family, or is it quite normal that sort of modern day farmers don't necessarily live on the land in the old farmhouse?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a lot of farmers now would have built new houses back. Obviously, I suppose a lot of years ago, most of them would have lived on the farm, but that is less and less common as time goes on. That actually, I think, is a farm that belonged to his uncle. It's not a family farm, but it's obviously in the family. It's a family farm, effectively. And he was farming up there and went there every single day. But there's an old farmhouse on that land, but it's not where he himself lived.
Okay. And he'd go there, he'd take his van there. What sort of farming was he doing?
He had both, actually. He was both, I suppose, cattle and sheep farmer, so he was doing both. And he was there all the time. He would have been there every day feeding animals, going about his chores. He was also a regular Kenmare martyr we've heard over the time. He was, so he just, I suppose, just, it's a big area of land. He's feeding animals in the winter. That's what he would have been doing that morning, feeding his animals, up around checking things.
Yeah.
Was farming. Every day, farming is 24/7 job, all year round. So
for sure. And there was, in the aftermath of his disappearance, the farm and the animals were going to have to be looked after, I imagine. Were they, or could they move them, or did they sell them, or what happened?
Yeah, the family made it obviously a very difficult decision, but I mean, at the first you have to look after your animals, and their care is of priority. You can't just leave them there. So they sold some of them, and I understand some were taken up to a friend up the country as well. They were doing what their best for farming. I mean, farming unfortunately goes on no matter what happens, and that's what they have to, trying to sort out the farming situation while Mike was at the time still missing.
Exactly. Because I think that came up at one stage, and it was actually somebody who would know about these matters way more than I would that sort of explained, you just could not leave those animals. They need to be tended every day. And that's why a sort of a decision was made quite quickly to sort of remove them from the land as the searches continued for him. I think the first kind of search, and we'll say that the Gardaí were really on the scene quite quickly. This wasn't a situation where somebody had gone missing, for over a week or more. They were there the following day, and they identified fairly early on that the slurry tanks needed to be searched as probably one of the first things they did, was it?
Absolutely. That's my understanding. Was like, I think my understanding is that Mike was reported missing on that Friday the 21st, so officially to Gardaí, who arrived on scene almost immediately. They were all day. So I think on that very first Saturday, which is the very first part of that investigation, they looked at those two slurry tanks. There's actually, as I understand it, two slurry tanks inside Mike's shed, both of them side by side, and they searched those. As my understanding is, they drained one, they took out some material from one and drained one into the other, but they were searched originally by the Gardaí search parties at the farm.
And from a distance, and which I am from a big distance here in Dublin, but from looking at what was going on and from my knowledge of investigations, I would say that the full resources were put on this. It was so unlike Mike Gaine not to show up, not to contact people. Something was seen as very, very, very amiss from the very beginning. And I think you have the guards on the scene quickly. And then there's all the resources have been pumped into this investigation all the way along.
Absolutely. I mean, for the past 8 weeks, the entire 8 weeks of the investigation before it was even upgraded to homicide, it's been one of the most extensive investigations that we can ever carried out in Kerry. The Gardaí were there for the first couple of days. They drafted in the defence forces, the Kerry Mountain Rescue, Civil Defence were there, the Search and Rescue Dog Team were there, the Garda Diving Unit were there. I mean, the resources were extensive. They searched the lakes, they searched the land, they searched the nearby roads, they checked CCTV, they did checkpoints to look for information. I mean, in my living memory, I think it's one of the biggest searches ever conducted in Kerry, and very thoroughly conducted. They looked through all the land, all of the, right up to the top of Moss Gap, which is an area of over 1,000 acres, and they looked at that extensively. Searched the farmyard, the sheds, the outhouses, by absolutely everything. Every resource was put into this.
And I would say one of the, the largest searches in across the country, not just Kerry. You haven't seen that level of personnel being drafted in many cases, but obviously that was because of the land and the terrain that you have described that's vast, is boggy, there's lakes, there's all sorts of different areas to search, and it's a very difficult patch of land to search. The locals came forward like an army to help in those searches. When they were requested, they went out into the fields, neighbours and friends.
On the very first weekend, there was over 200 volunteers. That was the very first Saturday, just a day after he was reported missing. More than 200 locals came to the farm and searched every area of that land. And many of them farmers who would have known Mike and worked with him and would know the land as well, because obviously this is the land they themselves work on or similar to it at least. And look, they searched absolutely everywhere for them. And some of his friends continued right throughout the 8 weeks, conducting searches nearby and looking for him. Like they never gave up hope. The community really tried their very best to search the land as much as they could.
Yes. And always, and really from the beginning, and it's probably because of his nature and how, how reliable he was. It seemed from the beginning that nobody ever thought he was going to be found alive. This was just so out of character. And his wife, when she did give a statement, God love her, she was absolutely devastated. You could see it in her face and her voice, and she was trying very hard to kind of make that public appeal at the time she did. So it was upgraded to a homicide in recent weeks.
It was, yeah. And at the end of the month, it was upgraded to homicide. It was, so this was a major step forward. It was kind of, I suppose, a slight surprise. I suppose it wasn't a surprise, but it was also a shock at the time. I suppose it really brought home that Mike was not going to be found alive at the time. So it became then a homicide investigation, but actually covers both. It covers both a murder and a manslaughter, because obviously, and we still don't really know exactly what happened to him, but that's what the actual term used at the time, because it could have been an accidental death versus a murder, which is pre-planned.
And I think that upgrade to that homicide would have given the Gardaí extra powers of, if they wanted to arrest an individual, if they wanted to get search warrants. When it's a missing person investigation, they don't have quite as many powers, and I think they don't have those powers of arrest. They could also have taken, have looked for warrants to search through phones, etc., etc. So it was a big development. Now, this weekend is where things take a really gruesome turn. And despite the fact that there's been so much reporting on Mike Gaine's disappearance and the story has been followed and followed by both local and national media, I think it was really, truly shocking when this happened. So is it that friends were using the slurry that was there? And again, is that something that was a very practical thing to do in his absence, to spread that on the fields? Farming, as we've said, has to go on.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is just literally looking after Mike's land for whatever was going to happen in the future. So they were just spreading slurry, as loads of farmers are doing and will do in the next couple of weeks when they're doing it. So they were just emptying the tank. There's nothing abnormal about this at all. It was just literally, as we mentioned, farming must continue and the land must be looked after. So they went to the slurry tank to take out the slurry to spread it on the fields. That's as every farmer does, like I said. And they use the agitator on Friday evening, which I understand mixes up this slurry. And they put it into the tanker and went out to the fields and began spreading on the fields on Friday afternoon. That was a friend of Mike, actually a man that would know Mike and would be quite friendly with him. He's a contractor, and that's what he does for a living. And he was spreading, I think they had undertaken some few loads of this, so gone back to the shed, filled it, and had spreading on nearby fields. You can see him from the side of the road. And during this, unfortunately, they found some material. The pipe became blocked, so they stopped and looking, and they found some material that looked suspicious to them. And I suppose that's what led to what happened this weekend. There was some material found, and they alerted Gardaí, and the area was immediately sealed off, and it subsequently was declared a crime scene.
The area being any of the land that the slurry had already been spread on, and back to the yard where those two slurry pits are.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what been ongoing since last Friday. I mean, it's obviously very sad. We have to remember this was at the time it was just a material. They didn't really know what it was, and they weren't 100% sure, I understand. But since then, we now know that these were partial human remains were on this land.
Absolutely. And very quickly, a man in his 50s has been arrested, has been questioned by detectives on suspicion of murdering Mike Gaine. He remains in custody, and that custody period could be extended. He could be brought to court, or he could be released without charge as the investigation continues. Now, obviously, we don't want to hamper any investigation and talk too much about this individual, but what can you say about him?
Well, at the moment, what we know is a man, he's 50, was arrested, he's 50s, was arrested yesterday evening and taken to a Garda station in Kerry. We understand he is known to Mr. Gaine, and he remains in custody today with questioning ongoing. Now, given that he was arrested approximately 5 o'clock yesterday, the Gardaí can detain him for 24 hours, but this too can be extended by order of the Chief Superintendent. So I understand, given rest breaks and sleeping last night, that the Gardaí have until about 10:30 tonight before they have to make a decision on the next step, which could be an extension or could be released without charge, or it could be charges. At this point, we don't know, as obviously the investigation is ongoing.
Exactly. Now, apart from gathering the remains and sealing off the fields where that slurry was being spread, essentially the crime scene is that slurry pit, I suppose, from where the remains had been left, both of which, as you said, were searched in the very beginning. It's going to be the job of presumably Forensic Science Ireland now to work out how long those remains may have been in that slurry pit. Were they there? Was he killed, around the time he went missing? And if so, were his remains there all along? Or was he killed at some time after those searches of the slurry pit? But you've got a key thing happening there, haven't you? You have a search has been carried out on that slurry pit, which is what? What does that look like? Is it a big barrel-y thing?
Apparently, again, I'm not sure.
You're not a farmer, Sinead, no.
I've learned quite a lot in the last couple of days, but I understand they're about the size of a swimming pool roughly. So it's a big area, let's remember, and extremely, the slurry tanks are big. Obviously, this isn't full any longer, but at the time of the original searches, it would have been full with slurry. So there's quite a lot of sludge, let's be fair, about material in it and difficult to see through. Like, it's a big, they are big, like,
Yes.
Dismantled yesterday. Like, I've been up at the farm now on yesterday afternoon, and they were taking out the slats from it and dismantling the entire tank and examining it. I mean, we've heard now forensics are going to be crucial to this investigation going forward. Not only on the material found and the DNA testing of that, but how long, like we said, that he was in that tank. Now, Gardaí, I understand, believe that obviously if something happened to him almost immediately on the day he went missing. So that's quite a long time ago. It's 8 weeks ago now, and so that's what Gardaí actually believe at this moment. Something happened almost immediately.
So from my end of things, I happen to be in the Forensic Science Ireland laboratory here in Dublin. Actually, it's just outside Dublin in Kildare this morning for a different matter, which I'll talk about on another podcast. A conference is coming up, and there's going to be a very interesting talk, which will be free to the public. And it concerns this kind of thing, I suppose, how forensics can help solve murders and how examinations of bones, etc., are conducted. The certainly material related to the murder of Mike Gaine certainly had arrived at Forensic Science Ireland over the weekend, and I think workers were called in because clearly the remains that were already discovered have been brought straight there, because this is going to be very, very, very key to it. Without perhaps a confession, what we're left with is going to be the science, isn't it?
This is crucial to it. I think the state pathologist, Sally Ann Collins, and an anthropologist, I actually remember the term, sorry, they've both been at the scene and will be examining this material. It's crucial. This is crucial to this investigation, the forensic tests and that will be carried out on this material. Because obviously, unfortunately, because of the length of time that's passed, they would be in a state of decomposition, which makes it even more difficult.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so they'll be looking ultimately for a cause of death, which may, which the bones may give up. And clearly, from the immediacy point of view, the Gardaí needed to confirm that indeed the remains were Mike Gaine, which is, I think, what the Forensic Science Ireland aided in. What's the kind of feeling down there?
I suppose the community are absolutely shocked. I think obviously they're shocked and stunned, but also I suppose there's a slight bit of relief. That's slightly tinged with relief, because now at least having the last 8 weeks and the focus on the town and what could have happened to Mike, just finally at least some sort of answers or some beginning of answers that will hopefully bring closure to the family. That's really what this is all about. At the end of the day, there's behind this very, very serious tragedy, who have been looking for answers, as we mentioned earlier. Wife, gave an interview appealing for answers at Mike, as did his sister Noreen. And this is now hopefully will help. But the community are shocked and stunned. I think that tragedy, crime to have occurred in their community, and they'd like these answers. Everyone would like answers. The family, most of all.
Absolutely. Well, Sinead, thank you so much, and we will probably talk to you over the coming days.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.